Hey, hello and welcome to CUFI U. You're live with me, Kasim Hafeez. I am Christians United for Israel's Outreach Coordinator, British Canadian. So today I'm going to talk, thank you for joining us, wherever you're joining us from. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about my personal story. As you can tell from my accent, I am from North Carolina. It's a joke. Maybe not that funny, but it's a joke nonetheless. I'm going to talk about my personal background. I used to be anti-Semitic, was a radical extremist. I believed that make the world a better place was the annihilation of the world's Jews and the destruction of the state of Israel. And today, United for Israel, and I'm even representing our CUFI Jerusalem shirt. So a lot's changed. And one thing people always, even today, there is this question about how do people living in the West become indoctrinated? How do they become radicalized? And, you know, I grew up in the UK in a place called Nottingham, so I can kind of shed some light on that. So, as I said, I grew up in the UK, in Nottingham. My grandparents had come from Pakistan, and it was a very traditional and conventional immigrant journey. You know, they came to the UK for better educational opportunities, better economic opportunities. And the thing was, when my grandparents came to the UK, they wanted to be part of a free Western and democratic society. They came to the UK to embrace the democracy, to embrace the freedoms, and they wanted their kids and their grandkids to be part of that society. So growing up, I grew up in a predominantly Muslim community. And look, this isn't the Muslims are coming run. This is me explaining my background and what I grew up through. So I grew up in a predominantly Muslim community in the UK. And as a whole, the community wasn't radical or extreme. They were hardworking people getting on with their life. But there was one topic that whenever it came up, whenever it was discussed, would always elicit a very extreme and radical reaction. I wasn't exposed to the level of radicalism across the board, which is so common today. It was extremism and radicalism. But there was one topic that was always a real issue which caused so much hostility, caused so much anger, and that was whenever Israel was mentioned. Whenever Israel came up, it would elicit very hostile and angry reactions. You would hear things like, you know, you can't trust the Jews, they control America. You can't trust the Jews, they control the media. And if I can just respectfully add, if any of our Jewish friends are watching today, if you do control the media, you're doing a really bad job. I just want to point that out. You can't trust the UN, the Jews control the UN, and so on and so forth. An interesting note in all that is, in my family, in my wider community, you know, we're talking the 90s here. I was born in 83. Nobody had actually met anybody Jewish. I didn't know anybody Jewish. My parents didn't, let alone anyone Israeli. And there was this association. The Jews were Israel, Israel were the Jews. It was one and the same thing. My dad was a lot more extreme and radical in what he believed. He would frequently say that Hitler was a great man, and his one mistake had been that he didn't kill enough Jews. I mean, that's an awful and rather sickening message to grow up around, especially when you're 5, 6 years old, say. And also, when you are at that age, that's not your priority. You're not thinking about the Middle East. You're not thinking about some sort of Jewish conspiracy. It's just not where your mind's at. But what you saw in my community, and I think it was mirrored across communities throughout Western Europe, and I would even say North America, was radicalism and extremism really communities and took a strong hold. And one of the catalysts for that was the publication of a book called Satanic Verses. I just want to pedal back. As I say the book was a catalyst, I would say more the reaction to the book was a catalyst. Now, Satanic Verses was a book written by Salman Rushdie, who was a British author. And it was deemed by many Muslims to be offensive to Islam. There were things that were written in the book that many Muslims found offensive. There were things it said about Muhammad and his companions and his wives, which were deemed offensive. Now, in Western society, one of the things with complete freedom of speech is that people say things which are offensive. People criticize religion. Christianity is, probably the front of that when it comes to people mocking religion and belief systems. Christianity and Christians really bear the brunt. But for people like my grandparents' generation, they'd come from countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, other Muslim majority countries where anything which mocked Islam even slightly could lead to you being given the death penalty. So here they are living in a Western society where there is free speech. And, as part of that, somebody has written a book which is deemed offensive to Islam. And the reaction, they didn't know how to deal with it. And the reaction which emerged was vocal, it was violent, and it really changed the balance of things. Here you had a community on the whole who'd been fairly quiet, hardworking, trying to integrate, make sure the kids go to good schools and all these things. Because, Britain has given me opportunities. Pakistan, I'm very grateful for that. And that was really important. And this book, which seemed to be attacking your values, and you saw an extreme reaction. You had protests all over the UK, from London to Manchester, people, copies of Satanic Verses. Again, this was unheard of. It's 1988, 89. People are burning a book because they disagree with it. You had bookstores getting attacked. You had translators of this book being attacked, stabbed, killed in some cases. You had Salman Rushdie, the author, who went into hiding for 2-3 decades because of a religious edict of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, who said it was the duty of every Muslim to find and essentially kill Salman Rushdie. Which again brings up another interesting point. For the British government, you have the leader of a foreign country, Iran, who you don't have diplomatic relations with, or if they did, they were very tense because of the path Iran had gone down, who is essentially ordering the death penalty on one of your citizens. I mean, it really was something I guess Britain had not really dealt with up until that point in the Islamist context. But what you saw in the aftermath of this whole Satanic Verses affair was things had changed. Into this kind of mess, I guess, this kind of change in thinking, this more vocal posturing, you had more extremist groups coming into communities. And this is the thing, these weren't people within a community going, okay, let's do this and let's take this direction. No, these were external groups coming into a community and trying to push a specific message. And that message was very simple. It was this idea that being a Muslim meant that you could not be British also, that your loyalty rested with Islam, not with the country you're living in, that above everything came your religion and your loyalty to that, and that's all that mattered. And the real issue with that in this context is it was using it to push people to more nefarious purposes, like extremism, like terrorism. And why it was appealing to so many was you've got to realize that for the Pakistani community that I grew up in, an immigrant community, many people came and worked in factory jobs, and or they were working in restaurants or working as taxi drivers. So you had a situation where you had one parent who was working shifts and very erratic hours. You had another parent who was at home. Neither spoke English as a first language, and they were very Pakistani in their outlook. And then you had another generation that was born in the UK who spoke English as a first language, was very disconnected from Pakistani culture, although they grew up around it, and also didn't feel they were British. So they're looking for somewhere to exist, and things like the Satanic Verses affair and the reaction to that, and how externally that was viewed as, why are these people burning books? That's not a good thing to do. There was a disconnect. So people are trying to find a space where they fit into society. And into this void, you have these groups who are going, this is your identity, this is your family, this is the way to think. And it's appealing. It gives people a sense of belonging. And then what they do is they meld that message with a political message. And what are the core uses and ways of doing this? We're talking before social media, the use of very graphic imagery. I'm talking about images of dead children from the Middle East, images of dead people from Kashmir, and these are evocative statements such as, these are your brothers and sisters, you should be fighting to defend them. These are your brothers and sisters, why are you not standing up for them? So it resonates. And here's the thing, when you look at a graphic image of like a dead child, it engages a part of your brain which doesn't look at it rationally, which is okay. Because when you see a dead child, who's going to ask, is this true? Is this factual? Am I being lied to? No, you take it first face value because it's something shocking and horrific. So they would use that, and then using that shock and horror and also making it relevant to somebody that, this is your brothers and sisters in your faith group. It turns it into anger. So it takes that this is shocking to, look, this is what the Israelis done. They're horrible, awful people. You should fight against them. I mean, but here's the thing, with that rational part of your brain being disengaged, it allows you to be manipulated. We've seen in previous conflicts with the advent of social media, images from Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, even images from horror movies are being tweeted and posted online as being from the conflict. So extremists lie, shockingly. But I mean, all of this was happening and it was starting to resonate with people. For me, it was very much in the background. I was hearing all this, but it didn't really resonate with me. What changed for me, and also I was absorbing these things in the background, these messages, but that I didn't even really process. What changed for me was in 2000. In 2000, I went to Pakistan to visit family, and we live in a village in Pakistani-controlled Kashmir. It's not like Karachi, which is one of Pakistan's biggest cities, which is a hub of extremism and all these problematic things. But for me, it was the first time I came face to face with an actual terrorist organization. That organization was Lashkar-e-Taiba, who are a Pakistani-based terrorist organization. Lashkar-e-Taiba loosely translates to Army of the Pure. And prior to 2000, when I went, they'd committed various terrorist attacks throughout India and Indian-controlled Kashmir. And I mean, after that, they became most notorious in the West with the Mumbai attacks in India, but they had a reputation long before then. And everywhere I went, this group was seen as a hero. They were seen as heroes. They were openly recruiting. They had huge murals on the sides of mountain faces. Their propaganda, their speeches. They even had, their own kind of songs, glorifying violence and jihad against India and so on and so forth. And one of the most striking images, again, they used very graphic imagery, but of a different kind. They didn't use the dead children and we're the victims, which is such a dangerous idea, because when you believe you're a victim and you're not, when you're convinced that you're a victim, because look at me, growing up in the UK, I was not a victim of anything other than, awful food, but that's a British problem. What can you do? Oppressed. I wasn't discriminated against because of my race. Yeah, racism exists. It does. Sometimes people are racist. But as a state, I had the same opportunities as anyone else in Britain. You go far. But there was this mentality that, we're oppressed because of our faith. We don't fit into British society because of our faith, which isn't true. And the problem with that is if you believe that, if you can convince people of that, it creates a very dangerous mix. When you believe you're a victim and you're not, this mix of an issue, which isn't existent, but you feel that there's an issue, and it can't be addressed because you're not actually a victim. You can't address it. So it creates angry young men. So everything in their life they see through this lens of, it's because I'm a victim, because the society oppresses me. So if, you're struggling to get a job, it's because I'm a victim of the society. No, it's because you have zero education and you're applying to be the managing director of IBM. It's not going to work. But Lashkar-e-Taiba's imagery wasn't about victimology. It was about empowerment, violently. there was images of the Indian flag on fire, the Israeli flag on fire, the American flag on fire, with captions such as, destroy the enemies of Islam. And look, when you look at this, you think this is scary, this is violent. But for me, it resonated because it was empowering. Images of dead children, these very images of victimology, and here somebody is being empowering. Here somebody is going, we're fighting back. And because I had believed that I was a victim without realizing up until this point, I'm going, okay, yes, they kill innocent civilians in India, but that's what the other side are doing, so it's okay. I'm the bigger victim here. And you see that so common now. So when I went back to the UK, I started looking into Lashkar-e-Taiba, and in 2000, there was an abundance of extremist materials available. You could buy videos and DVDs which had been produced by Al-Qaeda openly in Muslim bookshops. You could buy books written by Sheikh Abdullah Azam, translated into English, who was Osama bin Laden's mentor, really the grandfather of the modern jihadist movement. All these things were readily available. And I became more and more drawn to these ideas, more and more indoctrinated. But one thing that stood out for me, within Islam, you have, broadly speaking, Sunni Islam and Shia, the two sectarian groups. They don't get along. And for 1400 years, they've butchered each other. But the one thing the extremist groups on both sides agree on that I came across, be it Hezbollah, the Mahdi Army, the Iranian regime today, which is Shia, or Lashkar-e-Taiba, Al-Qaeda, Hamas, who are Sunni, they all agree that Israel needs to be destroyed. Are essentially a cancer, and it has to go. So for me, it's like, okay, here is something again, stuff I heard growing up, and here it is again, the Jews in Israel are evil. So it was there, and I became more and more extreme and dogmatic in my religious belief, and more intolerant, essentially. But what took me from being somebody who was embracing a very radical stream of Islam to somebody became very intolerant and extreme, and almost worse, was going to university. I went to a British university, bombarded with certain narratives. And on university today, the anti-Israel narrative is king. It just is. And to give you an example, one of my first days at university, I went and there was an event called How to Be a Better Muslim. I used to have big beard, long hair, kind of ZZ Top thing going on. So I thought I'm a pretty good Muslim, but hey, I'll go along. And for 20 minutes, we watched this video full of graphic images of violence from the Middle East, painting this very black and white narrative of Israel, evil, the Palestinians, innocent victims. So I left that event already, I was like, this I already know. But, you had a room full of people who didn't know what this was. There was no narration, no context, just ends with the caption, what are you doing for your brothers and sisters in Palestine? So just to show you how powerful something like that is, I had a cousin who went to the same university who watched a similar video, essentially identical, who had no interest in the Middle East, no interest in Israel up until this point, or anything, like literally no interest at all. She watched a similar video, and it essentially made her fly into a rage. I mean, she came to my house, she confronted me, and we had a discussion over a cup of tea, which is the British thing to do. And if you weren't throwing tea in Boston Harbor, maybe you guys would also be having cups of tea in the United States, which wasn't sweet tea and cold, but I digress. But we discussed it, and I explained that it's not this clear-cut, it's not that simple, it's not that black and white, but that's all it took, 20 minutes of highly emotive propaganda, graphic images, to make somebody so angry. And that's the goal. It's not about getting somebody to do some good. It's about getting them angry. It's about getting them motivated to hate. So when I was at university, I became very active in the anti-Israel movement. And I want to clarify that it's the anti-Israel movement. It's not pro-Palestinian. Because when Hamas are killing their own civilians, dragging them through the streets, calling them spies or traitors, nobody cares. When Hamas is using kindergartens to hide rockets in, nobody cares. When the Palestinian Authority is using millions of dollars of aid, one, to pay terrorists, and two, to fill their own pockets, nobody cares about the Palestinians in that context. But when Israel defends itself, then, it's like the world's about to end. It's an anti-Israel movement. The movement on campuses exists simply to delegitimize and see the end of the Jewish state. It's really plain and simple. And for me, coming from that background, It's a simple truth. The issue is not that there is not a Palestinian state. The issue is that the state of Israel exists. It really comes down to that, very plain and simply. So I was very active at university, spreading propaganda, spreading hate, spreading lies, because honestly, the truth didn't matter. You know, when you are spreading a narrative and you're trying to make people hate, you don't care about the truth. And you know, I'd never set foot in the Middle East, but I was an expert, obviously. So I went down this path, and radical Islam always asks you this question: what are you doing? It's trying to push you forward, like you can do more, and that more is normally violence. So I was doing all these things, and then I decided I can do more. How is going to protests, chanting slogans, handing out leaflets going to change anything? I need to take an active part in this struggle. So I decided that I was going to go to a terrorist training camp and then do whatever was necessary. Thankfully, that didn't happen, or you know, I probably wouldn't be here today. And what changed? It wasn't this, you know, eureka moment. It was a gradual process. And the first step of that process was seeing the case for Israel by Alan Dershowitz. I never looked at anything which was supportive of Israel or even factual when it came to the Middle East. I was reading material which was just validating my perspective. So I picked up this book. I saw it as propaganda. I was so convinced I was right. I thought, these are lies I can debunk. And I guess you could say it's for ego. My ego was going, I can show how bad the Zionists are. You know, there is no case for Israel. Israel is like the Nazis in my mind at the time. So I read this book cover to cover, and Alan Dershowitz made some incredible claims about the Jewish people having a presence there for thousands of years, that, you know, Israel has always sought peace and all these things. So I read it, and it's a very well-sourced book, and I thought, these are lies. So I started reading books to counteract every argument, but the books I was reading were presenting these very emotional arguments, but no facts. They weren't giving me factual statements, and you can have your own opinions, but you can't have your own fact. And Dershowitz stuck to fact in his book. So I took a step back and started researching, and almost 2 years went by of me reading about the Middle East, trying to get a broad picture. And although my picture was changing, I couldn't accept that I was wrong. I think it's the truth and you're ready to die for it. You don't read one book or 10 books and go, I was wrong. And my life really changed in those 2 years. I suffered from bouts of depression. My friend group had backed off because, you know, here was my truth and nothing was validating that. It's a difficult thing to process. In July 2007, I decided to go to Israel. I went, I'm going to get closure on this. I'll go to Israel. I'll see how awful it is, and then I can carry on the path I'm going. So I flew to Israel. I amassed a passport for control. What is the purpose of your visit? I explain. They then put me in security for 8 hours, which wasn't a bad experience. Okay, look, 8 hours is a long time. That experience where people were respectful. The security officer was very much like a Jewish mother. He was repeatedly trying to feed me and give me things to drink. I went to Saudi Arabia. I went to Saudi Arabia as a religious pilgrim many years before I went to Israel, and the level of racism I saw in Saudi Arabia, based on literally the color of people's skin, racism of not being a Saudi or an Arab, and the level of bigotry towards different kinds of Muslims as they weren't the right kind of Muslim, was shocking to me. And here I am in Israel, but yes, 8 hours is a long time, but the guy was very apologetic, explained why and what was happening. And so it was an interesting, and also the first time I spoke to an Israeli. So eventually I'm let out of security and I leave and I go to Jerusalem. I don't know anyone in Israel at this point. And I'm just wandering around, and, you know, naivety, I'm looking for apartheid. I'm looking for signs which say Arab only or Jews only. And if you've ever been to Israel, you don't see that. You know, instead I'm seeing people with headscarves, people, Hasidic Jews, soldiers, men, women, people with pink hair, you know, all this diversity. And I spent times and I was talking to people, and, you know, I was hearing their stories. I was hearing these very normal stories of people trying to live their lives, who didn't have hatred for me, who didn't have hatred for Muslims or Arabs. They just want peace and to be able to live their life. And, you know, here's me for years, you know, when buses were blowing up in Jerusalem, I thought they deserved this. And, you know, I'm talking to them, and they're just normal people trying to live their lives in their home, you know, the city that they've dreamed of forever, Jerusalem, they're back and they're home. So, I wandered around for hours and talking to people and really struggling, even talking to Israeli Arabs who go, this is my home. I have it better here than any other Arab in the Middle East. Yes, there are problems, but every country has problems. Eventually, it was a lot to take in. So I decided to be a bit of a tourist. So I go to the old city. I went to the Temple Mount, Al-Aqsa. I went to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and I was going towards the Western Wall, and I wasn't sure if I'd be allowed, because in Mecca, non-Muslims are not even allowed into the city of Mecca. So I walk, I think I'm never going to come back here. So I walk towards the Western Wall, and the security post, I go, I have no problems. And I'm walking towards the Western Wall. I get to the Western Wall, put my hand on the Western Wall, my forehead against it, really not sure what I'm doing. And honestly, it was like a eureka moment, because at that moment, it's like a moment of clarity. Because I went, here I am in Israel, the Jewish state. I met people from every background, every religious background, and they're normal people. What really resonated with me in that moment was, no matter what happens from this point on, it's 2007, wars, peace agreements, conflicts, there are 6 million Jews who will never see this. There are 6 million Jews who will never see the restoration of the nation which could have been their salvation. Because the honest truth is, when Jews were trying to escape Germany during the Second World War, the world shut its doors. Yes, we say never again after the Holocaust, but when the world had a chance to stop it, we didn't. And history has constantly shown that when it comes to the Jews, the world looks the other way. And for me, the only guarantee of never again is that flag, that white with the blue Star of David at the center. The flag that symbolizes the return of the Jewish people to their homeland. And that's what resonated, this story of survival, this story, this amazing human story that throughout even the darkest periods of their history, the Jewish people have endured and came home. They kept the belief in God alive. They fought against persecution, but they did not give up their God, and they came home. And within that, there was this strong, that resonated. It stood out for me, it resonated. So I spent some more time in Israel. I traveled around because I want to understand it more. And after a few weeks, and I was getting ready to go home, I had a simple decision to make. I either go, I've got this wrong, and I wash my hands of it. I don't want to be involved in this at all, positive or negative. And that's what I did. I spoke out and I told the truth. And like I said, it's been 10 years since my first trip to Israel. A lot has changed. I live in Canada. Me and my family have a strained relationship, to put it mildly. I get occasional, very poorly spelt death threats, which says more about grammar and education in the world today than anything else. But I don't regret what I did. Honestly, this has been one of the best choices I've made, because it's the right thing to do. Regardless of the death threats, regardless of the hostility, regardless of the hatred on campuses at times, this is the absolute right and moral thing to do, because there is no country on earth which is being targeted like Israel is. In a country which has provided so much to the world, be it medicine, technology, science, Israel is being targeted. Nobody says anything about Saudi Arabia or Iran or Pakistan, where you have a woman on death row for refusing to leave Christianity. They target Israel, the one place where the Christian minority has grown, the one place where in the Middle East where people can practice their religion in freedom, the one place where men and women can compete in the workplace and in society in the Middle East. This is the country we're targeting, a country which the size of New Jersey, but whenever a country is suffering, be it Japan, Haiti, or even the United States with Hurricane Katrina, Israel was on the ground helping. Israel Aid are out there helping change lives. Yet this is the country we want to boycott. Not Saudi Arabia, which locks people up for bringing Bibles into the country. Not Iran, which executes people daily. Israel. This makes no sense. It's immoral. It's craziness. So I just started by talking to friends, talking to family, and through it all, it's been difficult, but this is the right thing to do. And I'm honored to be part of Christians United for Israel, because I think we are making a difference. We are spreading the truth, and we are fighting the good fight where it needs to be fought. And as I wrap up, I want to really thank everybody for joining us today. It's, it really is appreciated. Thank you for listening. But if there is one takeaway I could give you, if there's one thing I ask you to take away, don't take this as my story. This is my story. My life goes on. We at Christians United for Israel keep fighting this fight. What I ask is that you do something, that you play your part, that this, if you're not doing something already, this is the start of your story, be it joining CUFI, be it signing up on our website so you get those email alerts, be it wearing a t-shirt which shows the world where you stand proudly. Do something, because all it takes for evil to flourish is for good people to do nothing. This isn't somebody else's fight. This is our fight. What Israel faces and has faced for decades, we're facing today, right here and right now. And if we allow Israel to fail, I believe that the rest of Western society will be next. So be strong, stand up for what's right, and God bless you all. Thank you so much.